The forest never slept. Even when the wind died and the leaves stilled, there was a kind of breathing in the silence. Something old and watchful, something that remembered everything humanity tried to forget. That night, I should have turned back before the path curved toward the ruins. I should have listened to the way the trees whispered my name, the way the air trembled like it knew what I was about to do, but I didn't. Because mercy, when it lives inside you too long, starts to sound a lot like madness. My lantern flickered as I stepped through the fog, its light cutting thin ribbons through the darkness. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of frost beneath my boots, the scrape of iron branches overhead, the faint whisper of my breath as I whispered prayers I didn't really believe. The moon was a sliver of pale silver behind clouds, and the deeper I went, the colder it became. I wasn't supposed to be there. No one from the village ventured into the cursed woods after sundown. But I had heard the howl, low, broken, not the kind that promised death, but the kind that begged for it. And somehow it didn't scare me. It called me. My name is Lyra Vance, healer's apprentice, the one who mends bones and closes wounds, the one who should know better than to chase monsters into the night. Yet that night, I was the one who found him. The ruins came into view like the skeleton of a forgotten cathedral, arches eaten by moss, stones slick with time. My lantern's flame dimmed as if afraid of what it saw, but I stepped closer anyway. The air here smelled different, metallic, like blood and rain and something older, darker. Then I saw it, a shape slumped against a crumbling pillar. Chains glinted in the half-light, and beneath them, fur black as night itself. At first I thought it was a bear. Then it moved. The sound it made wasn't an animal's growl. It was deeper, a rumble that trembled through the ground into my bones. His head lifted, slow, painful. And then I saw his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a beast. They were a man's, a man cursed. They glowed gold, faint at first, then flaring when they met mine. And in that one heartbeat, everything inside me went still, because there was power there. Raw, ancient, feral. But also something else. Desperation. He was chained from neck to paw, iron etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The marks burned into his flesh, smoking where metal met skin. I could smell the blood, hot and thick, mixing with the damp air. "Stay back," he rasped. The voice wasn't a voice at all, more like a sound that lived halfway between man and beast. His throat worked around the words like it had forgotten how to form them. "Go," I should have listened, but I stepped closer. "You're bleeding," I whispered stupidly. A snarl ripped through the silence, so sudden that my lantern almost fell from my hand, but his body didn't move. He couldn't. Every time he tried, the chains flared with light and hissed, searing his skin. He flinched like he'd been struck. I swallowed hard. "Those runes, they're binding you." His gaze flicked to me again, wild and disbelieving. "And you think you can help?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. All I knew was that his scent filled the air, not like any wolf I'd ever treated. It was smoke and rain and thunder, something both alive and dying. My fingers trembled, but I reached for the chain anyway. The moment my skin brushed the iron, pain shot through me, a blinding surge that made me gasp. It wasn't just heat, it was memory. For one instant I saw flashes that weren't mine, a battlefield drowned in moonlight, a woman screaming, a crown of obsidian claws. Then it was gone. The wolf growled low, dragging my mind back. "You don't know what you're touching. Then tell me." He didn't. Instead, he looked away, eyes dimming, breath slowing. "You'll die if you stay." There was something in his tone that almost sounded like regret. "I've treated worse." I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Hold still." He let out a noise, a half laugh, half snarl. "You think mercy saves monsters, girl?" "No," I said softly. "But it saves people like me." And with that, I pulled the dagger from my belt, a silver-edged blade meant for cutting herbs, not curses. Still, I set it against the rune-etched clasp. The metal hissed. Smoke curled upward, smelling like burnt ash and rain. The first shackle cracked. The wolf's body jerked violently. A a snarl tearing from his throat so raw it almost didn't sound real. The second chain split next, glowing red before shattering into dust. His breath came fast, shallow, and by the time I reached the final lock around his throat, his head had drooped forward, golden eyes burning through the veil of pain. "Stop," he growled. "I can't. Then you doom yourself." I pressed the dagger down. The lock snapped. For a moment, the world froze. The wind stopped. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the chains burst apart, scattering embers into the dark, and everything went black. When I woke, the forest was quiet again. Too quiet. My lantern was shattered beside me, its glass smeared with blood. My body ached, but I was alive. The spot where the wolf had been chained was empty, save for scorched earth and a faint trail of claw marks vanishing into the mist. I pushed myself up, disoriented, and that's when I saw it, a mark burned into the ground where the chains had fallen. A symbol I didn't recognize, glowing faintly before it faded into ash. My heartbeat thundered. What have I done? The wind didn't answer. I stumbled home before dawn, every shadow feeling heavier, every sound sharper. But the forest didn't let me go easily. As I crossed the final bridge, I swore I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. When I turned, nothing was there. Only the fog. By morning, the entire village felt wrong. The air was thick, like before a storm. People whispered about the forest, said they'd heard something howl near the ruins, said the earth trembled. I said nothing. I spent the day at the healer's cottage, pretending to crush herbs while my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I dreamt of gold eyes watching me through a veil of fire. Of a hand, not a paw, touching my throat, leaving a phantom heat there. I woke drenched in sweat, my pulse racing. And when I looked in the mirror, for a second I thought I saw something glowing faintly at the base of my neck, like a sigil made of light. But when I blinked, it was gone. The next evening, the first body was found. A shepherd's wife, torn apart near the edge of the woods. They said her eyes were missing, and her blood had burned the grass black where it fell. The village elders gathered, muttering about spirits and demons. They spoke of sealing the forest again, of fire and salt, and all I could think about was the black-bound wolf and the way his chains had glowed before breaking. By the third night, the howling returned. It wasn't one wolf. It was many. And woven beneath their cries was something that made my bones ache. A low, echoing command that no mortal voice could make. The people barred their doors. Children cried, and I sat by my window, lantern dark, waiting for something I couldn't name. When the knock came, I thought it was a dream. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door, precise, patient, confident. I froze, every instinct screaming not to answer. But the healer's cottage was at the edge of the village, and no one else would come this far after dark. I opened it. He stood there, barefoot, drenched in rain, black hair clinging to his skin. His eyes burned gold, the same molten color I'd seen in the forest. Not a wolf now, a man, the same one I had freed. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, like he was memorizing every breath I took, every heartbeat. There was something terrifying about his stillness, something regal and unrestrained. He didn't look human. He looked like something pretending to be human. My voice trembled. You broke the seal." His tone was quiet, but it carried like thunder through still air. I swallowed. "You were dying?" I was bound. His gaze flicked past me, scanning the room. "Your bloodline shouldn't have touched that magic," I frowned. "My bloodline?" He stepped closer and the air thickened. I could feel his power, like the storm outside had taken shape and decided to breathe. "You smell of them. The wardens. The ones who chained me. I'm not one of them?" He interrupted, voice low. "Your soul carries their mark. The same mark that burned me for centuries." I took a step back. "Who are you?" His lips curved, not quite a smile. "You freed me. You should already know." The lantern flame wavered as he leaned closer, golden eyes flickering with something that wasn't quite anger. You freed the black-bound king. The name echoed like a curse. My breath caught. King? He tilted his head slightly, watching me like a predator amused by its prey. You think the forest keeps beasts chained for nothing? I was sealed there because the world feared what I'd become. And now? His gaze darkened. Now the chains are gone. The wind outside roared as thunder cracked overhead. My pulse hammered so loudly I could barely hear his next words. You broke the seal, healer. And now every creature that once bowed to me will rise again. I didn't mean to. Distant embers. To the north. To my lands. The ones I lost. I can't protect you here. Protect me? You're the reason I need protection. His jaw tightened. Maybe, but I'm also the only reason you're still breathing. He stepped closer. His scent filled the air. Iron, storm, something ancient and alive. If you stay, they'll tear you apart. If you come with me, you'll learn the truth of what you've done. And if I refuse? The corner of his mouth curved faintly. Then you'll die before dawn. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned toward the door, pausing only once to look back. Decide quickly, healer. The pack moves when the moon rises. And with that, he was gone again, leaving me in the dark, surrounded by the bodies of monsters I didn't understand, and the echo of a choice that felt like the end of the world. That night, the forest howled again, but this time, the sound didn't come from far away. It came from just beyond my door, 1,000 voices crying out under the same moon, some in pain, some in devotion. And as I stood there trembling, the mark at my throat began to burn. Somewhere in the distance, a single voice rose above the others. Deep, commanding, unmistakable. Lyra. The call of a king, and against all reason, all fear, all common sense. I answered it. The night I chose him, the road north unfurled like a vein of darkness through the ribs of the pines, and the moon kept pace like a silent witness to a crime I hadn't decided was mine. He did not come to fetch me. He did not need to. When I stepped outside, the wind moved like it recognized me, and the mark at my throat beat once, hot, and the forest parted. I walked. The path was older than the village roads, older than the stones themselves, stamped with paw prints so deep they might have been fossils. I was not alone. Shapes flickered in the trees beside me, wolf shadows whose eyes glowed like banked coals. They never crossed the boundary of the path, never touched me, but I could feel them like a fever at my back. My heart beat toward them, terrified and steady at once. At the river's bend, mist breathed off the black water, and he stepped out of it as if it were a curtain. Kale wore the night the way kings wore ermine. A mantle of shadow hung off his shoulders, and runes slept along the leather at his wrists. His hair had been tied back with a strip of scarlet cloth, and the color made his eyes look even more molten, like something that could burn through iron. He took me in with a single glance that felt like a hand closing around a secret. You came, he said. There was no surprise in it, only inevitability. I didn't want to die before dawn, I answered, mostly to convince myself I still had a voice. Few do, he murmured, and a small smile moved through his face and was gone. He nodded once to the river. The crossing. There was no bridge, only a low, black barge, moored by a rope braided with silver wire. I did not ask who it belonged to. He had the gravity of a place where questions were currency you paid with blood. He offered his hand. I didn't take it. It made no difference. The moment I stepped onto the wood, the barge pushed off as if obeying his breath. We glided through a tunnel of fog. Water licked the sides in whispers, and somewhere beneath, something vast rolled over in its sleep. Kale watched the bank slide by, tree, stone, the broken antlers of a fallen stag, like a man counting beads on a rosary. Do they hate you? I asked. My voice startled me. The ones who burned the village. The ones who came for me. Do they hate you for being bound? For being freed? They don't hate, he said. They remember. Memory is a kind of worship, and what am I to them? Proof that the old story breathes again. The mark at my throat pulsed like a second heartbeat. I imagined 1,000 wolves lifting their noses to the air, tasting me on the wind, and I shivered. On the far bank, the path rose into hills scabbed over with heather and slate. We climbed. The shadows that had trailed me through the pines fell away, replaced by the colder notice of the highlands. Wind leaned hard against us, tasting like iron and ice. I was not dressed for a kingdom. I was dressed for a village hearth that no longer existed, he noticed. He shrugged out of his cloak and put it over my shoulders without looking at me, and it smelled like smoke after rain, and a metal that wasn't on any smith's chart. Warmth moved through me, not just against the skin, but down the spine, like a hand closing each vertebra in turn until I stood straighter than I ever had. "Thank you," I said, unused to gratitude that felt like risk. "You'll need it," he answered. "The Citadel doesn't welcome easily." Citadel. The word built itself ahead of us, syllable by syllable, into the thing it named. We crested a rise, and it was simply there, as if we'd cracked open the world and found a blade inside it. Black stone veined with silver. Towers like spears driven into the sky. Walls whose shadows were colder than the wind. The place had been carved out of a mountain that didn't want to be touched, and it showed in every angle. This was not a castle built for comfort or display. It was a shape made to contain power, and to keep everything else outside of it small. At the gate, wolves lay like statues along the steps. 6, then 6 more, then 6 again in a pattern that made the back of my tongue taste like metal. They lifted their heads together when Kale's boots hit the first stone. Not a sound. Submission didn't need noise. It needed breath. The doors opened. Not by hands I could see. The hall beyond was a throat of stone. Torches burned with a light that wasn't flame. White and cold, like the color of breath on winter glass. Runes slithered along the walls when you weren't looking at them. When you did, they froze like children caught misbehaving. "Is this what you ruled?" I asked, voice small against stone. "An empty palace of obedient shadows?" He didn't look at me. "It used to be louder. Because you were louder," answered another voice, from a stare that curved down like a rib. A woman. She moved with the balance of a blade being drawn from its sheath. Her hair was cropped close against her skull, dark as a crow's wing, and scars like pale vines crawled up one side of her throat into the hinge of her jaw. She wore a coat the color of wet ash, and had a ring of keys around her wrist that made no sound when she walked. "Vessa," Kyle said. "Your Majesty," she replied, which would have sounded insolent in any other mouth. In hers, it was a measurement, a weighing. Her eyes flicked to me. They were a wolf's eyes in a human skull, yellow-gray, and assessing. "So it's true." A warden blood broke the seal. "I am not," I began, but she was already circling me like a riddle. "The scent is old," she said. "Salt and oath metal, and sorrow." Her nose wrinkled the tiniest bit. "They taught you to heal so you would never think to guard. Clever, but blood remembers." I don't know what that means. "Stop talking like I do." "Vessa," Kyle said, a thread of warning under my name. She bowed the distance between deference and defiance. "Apologies. I forget the living have to be coaxed like skittish colts." She gestured with her wrist, and the silent keys glinted. A door in the wall opened to a corridor that hadn't been there a blink ago. "The Queen's Gallery hasn't been used in a century. It is clean, it is high. Nothing climbs to it without wanting to be seen. If she sleeps, she will not be taken. If she wakes to wander, she will not get lost. The Queen's—" I began, but the word died on my tongue like a moth on a flame. I felt the shape of it like a heat under the skin. Queens belong to kings the way crowns belong to skulls, and I had no interest in belonging to anything. I'm not— I tried again. "No one is," Vessa said. And there was a strange kindness in it. "Until they are." Kyle said nothing, but his silence was shaped like a regret he refused to hold. He took 2 steps toward me and stopped, as if there were a line on the floor only he could see. "Rest, eat, don't touch the mirrors." "Why?" "Because they don't show you," Vessa said. "They show what the castle wants from you." I kept my eyes off the reflective panels of obsidian as Vessa led me. I had never been afraid of my own face before. The stairs wound up and up, spine of the place, and the walls whispered with drafts that sounded like voices spoken behind hands. Now and then we passed a window slit, and I caught the night tossed in pieces across the mountains, a scatter of knives. I did not look too long. Things looked back from those kinds of distances. The gallery opened like a mouth gasping for light. Not a queen's room like a village child would imagine. No gold stitched into velvet. No lazy fire listening to laughter. This was a high, long space of black wood and white wolf pelts, of narrow windows cut in a repeating pattern that made my eye count without my permission. The bed was a platform low to the floor, sheets a pale gray that was almost blue, the color of an unhealed bruise. At the far end sat a vanity with an obsidian oval the size of a door set into it. I pretended the mirror wasn't there. He cut me off with a look that silenced me, then softer, almost mournful. Mercy is a dangerous gift. The room dimmed. The lantern flickered out, and I realized something horrifying. His shadow moved even when he didn't. He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. Rain hissed against his skin, steam rising from where it touched him. "You'll see me again, Lyra." "How do you know my name?" I whispered. He didn't answer, only glanced back once, eyes blazing like twin suns, before vanishing into the storm. That night, the village burned, and as I watched the flames crawl toward the sky, the echo of his voice haunted me. "You freed me. You freed the king." And somewhere in the distance, through the smoke and thunder, a single wolf howled, long, low, and heartbreakingly familiar. The sound of something ancient, returning to life. The sound of fate closing its hand around my throat. The night after the fire never truly ended. Smoke still clung to the valley, like a ghost that refused to leave, curling around the remnants of homes and hopes alike. The smell of ash was everywhere, on my skin, in my lungs, woven into the very air I breathed. Every flicker of light felt like flame. Every gust of wind sounded like a scream. I had seen death before. I was a healer. Death came quietly, respectfully, like a tired friend. But this was something else. This was slaughter. The village that had raised me was gone, burned to the bones of its foundations. The healer's hut, the well, even the old oak tree that marked the border, all reduced to cinders. Only the stone ring where we held the moon rites still stood, blackened but unbroken. I sat there until dawn, watching the sun rise over ruin, clutching the pendant my mother had left me. The wind whispered through the hollow spaces of the burned houses, carrying voices that weren't quite real. "They're gone," I whispered to the ashes. "All of them." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the fire that had killed them. It was me, because I had freed him, the black-bound king. By noon, the survivors had gathered. Scattered faces, burned hands, hollow eyes. We buried what we could find. When the elders asked if I'd seen anything that night, I lied. "No," I said, my voice steady though my heart trembled. The fire spread from the woods. They believed me. Or maybe they wanted to. Still, I could feel the eyes of one man on me, Captain Reese, the village sentry. He'd known me since childhood. His silence said he didn't believe a word. "Lyra," he said quietly as we piled the last mound of earth. "You were near the woods the night before, weren't you?" I froze. "How would you know that?" He nodded toward the edge of the clearing. "Found your lantern glass, shattered near the old ruins." My blood ran cold. Before I could speak, he stepped closer. "If something's out there, you tell me. The elders are too frightened to listen, but I'm not." Something in his tone, protective, steady, almost made me confess. But then, from deep within the forest, a sound rolled through the air. A howl. Low at first, then rising, long, mournful, powerful. It wasn't just one. Dozens joined it, echoing across the valley, weaving through the smoke like a promise. Every villager froze. Every child clung to their mother's skirts. The pack was awake. Reese turned toward the trees, his jaw tightening. "They're too close. Wolves haven't come this near in years." He didn't know the truth. They weren't coming. They were returning. That night, the fog rolled in thicker than before, swallowing the moon. I lit a single candle in my window and sat beside it, sleepless. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak felt like breath. I couldn't stop thinking of him, the man I'd freed. The way his eyes had burned gold through the rain. The way his voice had sounded like thunder wrapped in velvet. He had said I would see him again. Part of me wanted to believe he wouldn't. That he'd disappeared into the wilderness to rule whatever beasts obeyed him. But another part, the darker, more honest part, knew better. He was not the kind of monster who vanished. He was the kind that waited, and that night, he waited for me. The knock came just past midnight. 3 raps again, slow, deliberate, impossibly calm. My candle flickered. The room felt suddenly smaller. "Lyra," came his voice through the door. Deep, measured, commanding. "Open it." Every instinct screamed not to, but my hand moved anyway. When I unlatched the door, he stood there again. No longer soaked in rain, but in darkness itself. His hair fell over his forehead, black as the night behind him, and his clothes looked torn from another era. Dark leather, crimson sash, metal clasps shaped like runes. He wasn't human. I could feel it. The air bent around him, alive with an invisible pulse. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. His gaze swept over me, slow, consuming. "You freed me. Now you owe me." "I owe you nothing." A faint smile ghosted over his lips. "You owe me your safety. You broke the seal. That bond ties you to me whether you wish it or not." I took a step back. "You burned my village." His expression didn't change, but the light in his eyes dimmed, almost imperceptibly. "I didn't order their deaths. Then who did?" "The ones who served me before the binding," he said quietly. "They felt the seal break. The old oath reignited. They remembered." "You're saying they killed innocent people because you were freed?" He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "They are not wolves as you understand them. They are remnants of my reign. Blood-born beasts who do not forget their king, then stop them." A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Guilt, perhaps, or rage. "If I could command them still, do you think I would stand here speaking with you?" I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close he was. "What are you, really?" He leaned in, the faint scent of storm and smoke curling around me. "Once," he murmured, "I was the ruler of every pack from the northern glaciers to the obsidian seas. They called me Kyle of the Shadowfang, king of the bound moon. And you, little healer, broke the spell that kept the world safe from me. I wanted to run, but the moment I moved, his hand shot out, faster than sight, and caught my wrist. His touch wasn't cold. It burned. My breath caught as pain flared up my arm, and for an instant, I saw flashes again. Visions. Wolves bowing under blood-red skies, a throne carved from bone, a woman screaming as silver chains coiled around her wrists. I gasped. "He let go. Your blood remembers," he said softly. "It's waking. I don't know what that means. You will." His tone was final, absolute. Then he turned to leave, the shadows following him like loyal hounds. But before he vanished into the mist, he paused. "When they come for you, say my name," he said. "It will protect you." And then he was gone. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. The survivors began to rebuild. But whispers spread faster than fire, stories of shadows moving through the woods, of golden eyes watching from the dark. Children spoke of hearing voices in their dreams. And at night I could feel him. Sometimes, the air in my room would thicken, the candlelight dim, and I'd hear the faintest whisper, my name, carried on no wind, Lyra. Part of me hated him. Another part didn't know how to feel. He was both my sin and my salvation, the monster I freed and the reason I was still alive. Because when the beasts came for the others, they never came for me. Until the 4th night. I woke to the sound of glass shattering. The window blew open, wind tearing through the room. The candle extinguished, plunging everything into shadow. My heart leapt into my throat as I reached for the dagger beside my bed. But before I could move, someone, stepped through the window. 2 figures. They weren't men. Their bodies were twisted, elongated, bones jutting under skin like claws trying to escape. Their eyes gleamed red. Their teeth were too sharp, too many. "Found her," one hissed. I stumbled backward. "Stay away." They didn't listen. The first lunged, and a blur of motion filled the room. A snarl so deep it shook the walls, then silence. When I opened my eyes, both creatures were on the floor, their throats ripped open, and he stood over them, Kyle. His eyes burned like molten gold, his chest rising and falling with barely leashed fury. Blood stained his jaw. He wiped it with the back of his hand, gaze cutting to me. I told you they'd come. I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. He took a step toward me, his expression unreadable. You're marked now. They smell it. They want it. Marked? I whispered. What are you talking about? He reached out and brushed his thumb against the base of my throat. A faint glow ignited beneath my skin, a symbol made of light, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. This is the sigil of the bound king, he said. When you freed me, it chose you as witness to my release. That means your fate is now tied to mine. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does, he said quietly, but choice ends the moment you tamper with old magic. Something in his voice, almost regretful, made my chest ache. I tried to step back, but his hand lingered near my face, not touching, just hovering close enough for me to feel the heat of him. You can't stay here, he said. They'll keep coming. Where would I go? He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something in them that wasn't fury or command. It was need, a dangerous kind of need. Come with me. I hesitated. To where? He looked out the window, where the horizon burned faintly red with... Vessa placed a tray on a low table. Meat, dark fruit, bread whose crust shone like lacquer, a pitcher of water that smelled faintly of mint, and something that made the mark at my throat pulse once. Eat, she said. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. I ate. I didn't want to owe this place anything. My body took its tithe regardless. When the first bite hit my tongue, a kind of hunger opened its jaws in me I hadn't known I was keeping muzzled. I didn't stop until the pit of fruit rolled off the table and clinked against the floor. Vessa watched like a sentinel, like a mother animal who would gut you if you came too close to her young. And when I wiped my mouth on the back of my hand like a child, she tossed me a linen napkin with the smallest of smiles. I thought the king ruled alone, I said, when my breath was mine again. He does, she said. I rule his doors. Where did he go? Where he always goes. To argue with a throne. I slept, and the castle dreamed me. That is the only way to say it. I woke more than once with someone else's breath in my mouth, hot and desperate, the taste of iron on my tongue. The sheets had become chains, and when I kicked free of them, the chains hissed and dissolved into linen. I heard wolves pad through the corridor, though Vessa had promised nothing could climb. I heard the river answer the moon. Once, and only once, I heard a woman sing, a lullaby with all the comfort scraped out of it until the melody bled. When I could stand no more of being still, I left the bed and stood in front of the mirror I had been told not to touch. It reflected the room behind me perfectly, every seam and seam's shadow. It reflected me not at all, as if I were a hole in the world. Show me, I said to it. If you want something from me, show me what I already pay for. It obeyed. Or maybe it had only been waiting. Surface became depth. My absence became a corridor. The glass brightened until I had to narrow my eyes to needles. And then it was as if I stared down a well that had light at the bottom instead of water. A woman stood there, small and fierce, hair like mine but braided in a pattern I did not know. She wore a dress the gray-blue of bruises and a set of silver bands on her forearms, etched with the same runes that had burned Kale's flesh. Her eyes were my eyes, exactly my eyes, and they were full of a love I recognized in my bones and a fury I prayed I never would. Do not forgive him, she said. My heart rattled. Her mouth had not moved, but I heard her voice as clearly as if my head were her cup and the sound had been poured in. Do not forgive him unless he learns how to ask. Who are you? I whispered. My throat ached with the asking. It felt old. It felt used. A promise, she said, and a debt. She lifted her arm. The band slid to reveal skin whiter than should have been possible, and there, burned in, was the same sigil that pulsed at my throat. She touched it with 2 fingers, and heat climbed the mirror like a rhyme in reverse. I stepped back, but the heat found me anyway, kissed the mark on my neck, and the room tilted. When it stopped tilting, She was gone, and all that remained was my absence reflected back, black as a lake at midnight. My knees gave without asking my permission. I caught the edge of the vanity to keep from falling into the floor. Blood remembers, Vessa had said. I did not need my reflection to see that my blood was beginning to wake. I found Kale in the throne room without trying to. The castle allowed me to, the way a beast allows a familiar hand near its muzzle. The room was a shape you could break a nation against. The throne was a skein of obsidian and bone, smooth where 1,000 hours of 1,000 lives had worn it down. Kale stood with his back to it, hands braced on the edge of the dais as if he were keeping a mountain from sliding into the sea. If you sit, I said, does it eat you? He didn't turn. It remembers the weight of what sat here before. It takes its due. The woman in the mirror. His head came up, slowly. A wolf who hears a twig snap and knows what waits on the other side of the clearing. What did it show you? Not me. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Someone who wore my face like it was hers first. Describe her. Bracers. Runes. A mouth like she'd kissed knives. She said not to forgive you unless you learned to ask. I watched his shoulders settle like a decision taking its seat inside him. Who was she? He turned then. The light in the room did a strange thing across his face, choosing what to reveal and what to keep. Your line once stood where you stand and bound what I am, he said. She was one of them. They called themselves wardens. Some called them witches. I called them necessary. You let them bind you? Lead is not a word we used, he said quietly. But I agreed to the terms. Why? He looked past me, above me, through me, as if memory had become a skylight only he could see through, because I thought I would kill the world I wanted to rule. The honesty of it struck like a blow. No man in my village would have said such a thing aloud, even if it were true. Power is quieter when it knows itself. Dangerous, yes, but quieter. What changed? I asked. Why break the seal? A half smile cut one side of his mouth. You did that. I know I broke the chain. But why could I? Why me? He descended the steps without sound, each movement an essay on restraint. Close, he smelled less like storm and more like heat. Not summer heat, but forge heat. I could feel it against my throat where the mark lived. He lifted his hand and stopped a finger's width from my skin, as if he were listening for a sound that only his bones could hear. The seal was wound into a pattern that required 3 threads, he said. The king's blood, the warden's blood, and the forest's root. Old magic that bends for no one until it isn't a tree anymore. He tilted his head. A king I have remained, however, bound. The forest we both walk, that left the warden thread. It thinned. It stretched. It hid itself behind herbs and promises not to have power, but it never broke. My mother, I began, and the word stumbled out like it had barked its shin, did not tell you because she wanted you to be safe. It wasn't a question. Safe is a kind of lie people tell because they're tired of the truth. I stepped back. It felt like stepping off the edge of an argument into something else. If they bound you because you would have burned us all, why should I help you wear the world like a fur again? He didn't answer with words. He looked at me with an old thing in his face. Older than the mountains. Older than the promise of them. It wasn't apology. It wasn't plea. It wasn't anything human enough to name. It was a grief so vast it had to put on rage like a coat to walk around among people. Because the thing you freed is the thing that can keep the rest of me from waking, he said finally. It is a paradox I have learned to live in and a debt I cannot pay alone. I will break, healer. I am breaking. The packs smell it. The old ones want me a beast again because they like simple gods. The new ones want me dead. You are the only thread that knows how to knot this without strangling the hand that holds it. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have that isn't a lecture or a threat. Try a request, I said, and it hurt my mouth more than I expected. You might find it opens doors. He considered me as if I were a puzzle that might, if solved, become a key. Then he did something I had not expected from a legend with a city of iron at his back. He bowed, not a king's ceremonial incline. A warrior's bow, palms bare, throat offered just enough that trust could be mistaken for arrogance by anyone who missed the meaning. Lyra, he said. My name a weight he carried carefully. Help me hold the thing you freed so it does not devour us both. I did not answer for a long time. The wind found a crack and sang in it like a blade along a whetstone. Far above, in some corridor the castle refused to show me, a wolf walked and did not hurry. The mark at my throat burned and cooled, like a star practicing sunset. What would I have to do? I asked. His exhale tasted like relief and winter both. There is a rite, old as the first oath, new every time it is spoken. It is a blood oath, but not the kind you fear. I will not take what is not offered. I cannot. The binding put that cost on me. We stand in the place where kings are weighed, and we ask the old magic to measure us, with your line and mine together, and to bind what should be bound and spare what should be spared. And if it decides you should be spared nothing, then there will be no king, he said. Only a story about why there isn't one. And me? You will live, he said, and the certainty in it was a shock. Or you will not. But you will not belong to me if you do. And if you don't, I will carry that, not you. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to strike him. I wanted to put my head against his chest and listen to the thing under his ribs that wasn't a heart, and ask it to quiet. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered to the part of me that still smelled like ash and damp herbs and home. What do I get if I say yes? He did not bother with crowns or power, or the soft lies men told to women they wanted tied to them like talismans. He looked me full in the face like he had from the riverbank, and he said, "A chance to decide what kind of monster I am allowed to be." What do I get if I say yes? He did not bother with crowns or power, or the soft lies men told to women they wanted tied to them like talismans. He looked me full in the face like he had from the riverbank, and he said, "A chance to decide what kind of monster I am allowed to be." Vessa appeared as if the thought of a door had pulled her through it. She held a blade on a tray, short and leaf-shaped, silver at the edge, iron at the spine. The handle was wrapped in dark leather that had been handled so often it had become the color of hands. "The right hall is prepared," she said. "The moon's at the right tooth. Tonight?" I asked, and some smaller version of me ran circles inside my chest, a child looking for a place to hide. "Wait too long," Vessa said, "and the castle finishes the rite without you. It's impatient. It prefers kings to be obvious." We walked. Not the three of us. Two, with one guarding the doors that knew how to bite. The right hall lay in the oldest hip of the mountain, a chamber whose ceiling had not been carved but discovered, the inside face of stone that remembered rain from a time before men named it. A circle had been laid on the floor in a metal that stank like thunder. At 4 points bowls smoldered, not with coals but with some dark herb that released no smoke and filled my head with thoughts I had not earned. "Stand there," Kale said, pointing to a segment of the circle where the metal narrowed to a thread. He took the opposite point, and the space between us was a span and an ocean both. "Speak your name," said Vessa, and I realized she had come after all, face pale in the old light, "as your mother would have and as you would not." "Lyra," I said. The name sounded wrong when I said it like that. I tried again. "Lyra Vance." I tasted the syllables for something else, and found it like a seed under the tongue. "Lyra Varna." The word made the bowls burn a shade brighter. Vessa's eyes flicked to Kale's face and back. "King," she said. "Be honest, Kale," he said. He hesitated, as if there were a longer name he did not intend to wake. "Nothing else survives that I'm willing to ask." Vessa's mouth stiffened around a secret and released it unsaid. She lifted the blade off the tray and handed it grip first to me. "Blood pays for what blood frees," she said. "You cut the air over your mark. The old magic loves dignity. It loves courage more. Don't flinch." I didn't, and that felt like lying to myself generous enough it became a kind of truth. The blade kissed the place where the sigil burned at my throat. Heat met heat. I cut the air and felt it cut back. He did the same, pressing his palm to his own throat, and for an instant the room was measured in a single scent, iron and promise. Our blood did not fall. It lifted, strands of it rising as if gravity had been reversed, as if the room were beneath us, and the sky were where the floor should be. The strands reached, braided, burned. It hurt, not the skin, the shape of me. The right hall shuddered like an animal shaking off water, and then going still when it remembers what stillness means. The bowls flared, The circle cracked like ice under boot and then held. I heard wolves howl, and I knew without wanting to know that they were howling in a ring around the mountain, heads thrown back toward a moon that had become something else entirely for a breath. A voice spoke. Not Vessa's, not Kale's, not mine. It did not use words. It used the space between them. It told the story of the first time anyone had made the mistake of taming a thing that should have been loved instead. And the second time, and the second 100. It showed me a boy who had teeth too sharp for his mouth, and a mother who hid knives and lullabies and a crown made because someone had to carry the hate so the people didn't drown in it. It showed me a woman with my eyes who had bound a monster because she was the only person who could say please without being heard as Neil. It showed me the world turning toward winter and deciding to survive it by worshipping what scared it. Enough, I said, and the hall shook. The old magic laughed like stones collapsing into a river. It took what it wanted. It always would. But it left a thing behind the way wolves sometimes leave bones near a child's door, so the child will learn the names of her hunger. The braided thread of blood sank through the circle and into the floor. It did not vanish. It went to live somewhere I could not follow and would always feel. The mark at my throat cooled. The air turned toward ordinary and refused to get there. I realized my hand was still holding the blade, and I lowered it because it seemed grateful to be allowed to rest. Kale was looking at me like a man might look at a mountain the first time he realizes it will outlast him. What did you see? I asked. Enough to confirm my fear, he said. And that is? That I cannot keep you, he said. Only stand near you until you leave or I do. I wanted to tell him that the words made something in me ease and ache in equal measure. I wanted to ask him what keeping ever meant to a wolf who ruled a pack made of ghosts and winter. I wanted to press my palm to his mouth to stop him saying anything else he might regret, and to see if his lips felt like the weight his voice carried. Someone screamed. The castle swallowed the sound and spat it into the room sharper than when it went in. Vessa's head cocked toward the door. South Gate, she said. They've found us. Who? I said, and already the part of me that had learned to count herbs was counting heartbeats and doors and knives. Our cousins, Vessa said dryly, the ones who think all problems are the kind that open if you push hard enough. Cal's face closed like a fist. He stepped toward me and then didn't. He stood in the space of that intention, like a man trying not to step into a river that already had his reflection. Stay here, he said. I don't. Stay, he said again, and the word did something dangerous in my bones. Not command, not magic. Recognition. The kind of word that turns a body toward the voice that says it when the world is loud. If they smell the right on you, they will make you regret being born into any name. He left. Vessa stayed a heartbeat longer than I expected. A thin smile on her scarred mouth like the promise of an answer to a question no one had dared to ask. She placed something small on the edge of the circle. A charm of iron and 3 white hairs braided tight. For luck, she said. I don't believe in luck. Then let it believe in you. Alone, I listened to the battle begin like weather, the sound of bodies meeting bodies, the sound of claws finding the soft places of prayers, the sound of men who had chosen wolves never learning how to talk to the part of themselves that wanted to stop hurting. My hand found the charm. The mark at my throat warmed to it. I tucked it into the pocket of my dress and stepped over the line Vessa had told me not to cross, into the oldest part of the castle, where the mirrors were doors and the doors were teeth. I walked toward the south gate because the only thing worse than being afraid was being afraid alone. Halfway there, the castle coughed up someone who had not belonged in it a breath earlier. Reese. He was covered in travel and blood, and when he saw me, relief split his face in a way that made me want to sob and warn him to run in the same breath. Lyra, he said, and his voice broke on the last syllable. Thank God. You're alive. How did you... I followed, he said simply. I always have. Something moved behind him, a darker dark in the dark. A wolf, larger than any wolf had a right to be, eyes the color of old coins, teeth bared not at Reese, but at what Reese had brought with him by daring to love me. It's a trap, I said, and the castle screamed as if it had been waiting to say the same thing in stone. I did not have time to choose anything softer than survival. The world narrowed to a line as fine as a blade's edge. I ran toward the only king I had ever freed, And the night closed its jaw around us, and the north learned my name, the way a storm learns the shape of your house. The war found us before dawn. The castle's warning horns were unlike any sound I had ever heard. Low, metallic, ancient, vibrating through the bones rather than the air. I woke to it, my pulse already racing before my mind caught up. The walls shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash. Somewhere deep below, wolves howled, not in rage, but in readiness. I threw off the sheets, the cold biting against my bare feet as I crossed to the window. The horizon burned, torches, hundreds of them. The southern ridge glowed like a serpent's spine of fire, and steel winding toward the mountain gates. Reese hadn't lied. He'd brought the world with him. They had come to end the monster I freed, and in their eyes I was no different. By the time I reached the great hall, Cale was already there. He stood before the gates, sword in hand, shadows coiling around him like a living cloak. His armor gleamed faintly silver, engraved with the same sigils that had once chained him. Now they pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. His soldiers, wolves and men alike, lined the corridors. Some crouched on all fours, eyes glowing like embers. Others held spears carved from moonstone. The air itself felt alive, thick with the scent of iron and thunder. When he turned to me, time seemed to pause. The mark at my throat burned. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, though his voice carried over the storm outside. "I'm not hiding while others die for me," I shot back. His jaw tightened. "This isn't your war, Lyra. Then whose is it?" He looked past me, eyes distant. "Mine. Always mine." But when he moved toward the door, I caught his arm. "You said the right bound us. If that's true, then whatever happens to you happens to me." He stared down at my hand, small, trembling, defiant, then met my gaze with something dark and unreadable. "That's why I told you not to perform it." Too late. Something like a laugh slipped through his lips, low and rough. "You are more stubborn than the gods who cursed me." "Then maybe that's what it takes to survive you." For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. Just the two of us, standing beneath the cold fire of the torches, bound by choices we hadn't fully made. Then the gates shook. The attack had begun. The first wave hit like a storm breaking against a cliff. Steel met claw. Screams met snarls. The world became a blur of motion and sound. I could see them through the open doors. The invaders wearing silver-threaded cloaks, their blades carved with runes meant to burn wolf flesh. Hunters of the old ways, warden descendants like me. Reese was among them. I saw his face in the torchlight, streaked with blood and fury. He looked up at the battlements and found me instantly. Recognition flared, followed by horror. "Lyra!" he shouted. "Get away from him!" Before I could answer, Cale stepped forward. The mere sight of him froze men mid-strike. His power wasn't loud. It didn't roar or blaze. It radiated, like the heartbeat of the storm itself. He moved like smoke and lightning. One swing, one breath, one death. Each strike was precise, almost sorrowful. He wasn't fighting to conquer. He was fighting to endure. But the warden's army was endless. For every one that fell, 2 more rose. Blood slicked the marble floor. The air stank of ozone and ash. The walls trembled beneath the weight of magic older than memory. I ran, not away, but upward. If I couldn't fight beside him, I could find what fueled the assault. The warden's magic always began with a circle, a heart. Destroy that, and the rest would crumble. The staircases twisted around me, the castle shifting as if it understood my purpose. Torches flared. Doors opened where walls had been. The stones wanted me to reach it, and at the top of the eastern spire, I found it. A sigil burned into the floor, drawn in blood that shimmered black under the moonlight. A dozen wardens knelt around it, chanting in a tongue older than the stars. The air rippled with power, feeding the army below, and at its center, my mother's pendant. The same one I'd lost the night I freed Cale. It glowed now, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, tethering me to the curse that bound him still. "No," I whispered, stepping forward. The nearest warden turned, his eyes milky white with trance. The blood returns to the bond, he hissed. The curse must never sleep again. He lunged. I ducked, my hands finding the dagger at my waist. I wasn't trained to kill, but instinct did what mercy couldn't. I drove the blade up under his ribs. His breath left in a rush. The chant faltered. I snatched the pendant and pressed it to my chest. The moment I did, pain exploded through me, a searing fire racing through every vein. I screamed. The world blurred. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the tower. I was standing in the ruins of the forest. The night I had freed him. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Cale stood across from me, unchained, bathed in shadow light. His eyes blazed brighter than the moon. You shouldn't have taken it, he said softly. What is this? I gasped. The bond. He stepped closer, every movement slow, deliberate. The pendant was the heart of my binding. You've drawn its magic into yourself. I was trying to stop the war. You may have stopped more than that. The pain deepened, the mark on my throat glowing brighter until it burned through the fabric of my dress. He reached for me, his fingers brushing the edge of it, and the entire illusion shattered. I woke on the floor of the tower. The wardens were gone. The sigil had vanished. Only the pendant remained, now dull and lifeless. But when I looked down, I saw something new. The mark on my throat had spread, winding down my collarbone like molten gold. It pulsed faintly, in rhythm with another heartbeat that wasn't mine. Kyle's. And somehow I knew. He was dying. I ran. Through collapsing halls. Through rivers of blood and broken bodies. The air was thick with ash and moonlight. When I reached the throne room, it was nearly empty. Cale knelt in the center, his sword buried in the stone to keep himself upright. Blood poured down his arm, silver instead of red. His eyes found me immediately. You touched it, he whispered. I had to. He tried to smile, but it came out like pain. The bond's complete now. You've given it form. What does that mean? He looked at me the way dying men look at sunlight. It means if I fall, so will you. No. I dropped to my knees beside him. There has to be another way. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the side of my face. There is, but it will cost you everything. Then take it. His fingers tightened around mine. You don't understand what you're offering. I don't care. You once told me mercy is dangerous. Let it kill me then, but not you. For a moment, silence filled the hall. The storm outside paused, as if the world itself waited to hear his answer. Then he nodded. Once, slow, heavy with fate. He pulled me close until our foreheads touched. His voice dropped to a whisper that felt like thunder under skin. There's an old oath, older than the wardens, older than kings. Blood shared under moonlight binds two souls not by power, but by choice. He pressed his thumb to my throat. You already bear my mark. Now I will bear yours. Before I could speak, he cut his palm and pressed it to my chest, right above my heart. The blood burned through the fabric, seeping into my skin like fire and frost. The world tilted. The moon flared through the shattered ceiling. Its light turned crimson. Wind roared. The ground trembled. And in that moment, I saw everything. His memories, his curse, the centuries he had spent chained beneath the forest, his heart rotting inside a body that would not die, the betrayal of the woman who wore my face, the first warden queen. She had loved him once, then bound him to save the world from his grief. And now, I had undone her work. The mark on my throat blazed, merging with the wound on his chest. Power surged between us, so fierce it lifted us both from the ground. His blood, my blood, the bond's blood, fused into one light that turned the air white. I heard the whisper of something vast and ancient, a voice that wasn't voice at all, two bound as one, until the moon forgets her name. And then, silence. When the light faded, Cale lay beside me. The wound on his chest had closed. His breathing steadied. But the mark, our mark, still glowed between us, a single symbol shared by two hearts. He opened his eyes slowly, the gold softer now, less fire, more dawn. You shouldn't have done it, he said, his voice hoarse. You said I was already doomed, I murmured. He almost smiled. Then we'll face doom together. Outside, the horns had stopped. The howls had faded. The war was over, but deep inside, I felt the truth humming beneath my skin. The curse wasn't broken. It had only changed its shape, and now, it wore mine. Morning broke like a bruise. Not gold, not gentle. Violet and iron, the kind of light that makes a blade look honest. The castle breathed around me. Slow drafts down black halls. A steady thrum in the stone like a heart remembering how to beat. Somewhere far below, water moved through the mountain, and the sound kept time with the mark at my throat. I woke on the dais where the oath light had flung us down. Kale asleep beside me, one arm slung across his ribs as if he were keeping something caged. Not pain, not anymore. Something older, the habit of it. I watched his chest rise and fall. The room smelled like settled thunder and cold iron. The war had ended like storms end. Suddenly, with too much left unsaid, the mark between us pulsed once, the warmth traveling from my skin to his and back again in a loop that made me feel both tethered and steadied. His lashes flickered. Gold opened under them. Still here, I said, because it was all I trusted my voice to carry. He studied my face, and whatever he measured must have pleased the old thing in him, because a breath left his body like an apology he didn't want me to have to hear. Good, is it? I asked. It is. He pushed himself upright, wincing at aches that had nothing to do with wounds. The South has pulled back. Vessa drove off the worst of them before the right finished eating the room. The right ate. I glanced around, and in the chalk-gray light I saw it. The circle's metal line had partially sunk into the stone, fused there like fossilized lightning. My blood, his. The old magic had taken its portion. It had been messy about it. What did they want? I asked. Truly. Not the story they told themselves as they sharpened their knives. What they always want. He rose and offered a hand out of habit he would deny. When I didn't take it, he didn't insist. A world that never asks them to forgive what they fear. And what do you want? I asked, standing on my own. His answer was simple. To outlast the part of me that doesn't deserve to. Silence settled like fresh ash. I saw her, I said. In the mirror. In the right. The one who wore my face first. He didn't flinch. Kings don't. You saw Varna. My name in her mouth, I whispered, tasting it again. Lyra Varna. The syllables clicked against one another like joints sliding back into place. Was she my ancestor? She was your beginning, he said quietly. And you were her end. He crossed the dais with a soldier's economy, each step saying, I'm not tired even if I am. Come, you wanted truth. I will pay it in full. Truth, I said, following, isn't a debt you can settle. Then we will overpay. He did not take me up, to the clean light and cold wind, but down, past the halls that smelled of steel and wolf, past the old throne that looked more honest empty than full, down through steps that had been carved with a patience no living mason would indulge. Torches here burned without flame, a white, slow light that refused to flicker. The stone changed color as we descended, from black shot with silver to a deeper shade, the blue of bruises in winter. Vessa waited at the entrance to a door that wasn't a door, only a seam in the rock as fine as a scar you earned young and forgot about until a certain light found it. She had cleaned the blood from her coat. She had not cleaned the blood from her hands. It darkened the webs between her fingers like complicated ink. He brings her, she said, not to me, at last. She demanded it, he replied. Demanded. Vessa tasted the word with a private smile. Good. Her eyes slid to mine. You will want to breathe before you go through. People forget to inside. Why? I asked. Because the mountain remembers for you. I inhaled until the cold burned sweet. Kale placed his palm to the seam, and the seam widened like a mouth that had been waiting to speak a single name for a very long time. We entered a room shaped like a held breath. No angles, only curve. Walls that bent, ceiling domed low enough to feel intimate and high enough to make a cathedral jealous. In the center stood a pillar grown from the stone itself, not carved, not placed, risen. And inside that pillar, like a beetle encased in amber, lay a crown. It was not a circle. It was not pretty. Bone and obsidian and some metal. The color of a moonless river had been braided together into a shape that looked like antlers taught how to think. It made my teeth ache to look at it. "The Crown of Shadows," I said, though I hadn't been told the name. The words knew themselves. "The first crown I ever wore," Kyle said. "The last crown I ever loved." "Loved," I repeated softly. "You loved a crown?" He did not take offense. I was young enough to mistake being necessary for being loved. The crown encouraged the error. It speaks. The hair along my arms lifted. "It listens," Vessa said, "and repeats the part you most want to hear." "Like a mirror," I said. "Like a debt," Kale corrected. "You asked what I am. What the curse is. It is this. A promise made to a throne. The Warden Queen bound me because I would not break the promise myself." I moved closer to the pillar. The mark at my throat warmed in warning or welcome. I couldn't tell. Close, the crown's details arranged themselves into something worse than ornament. Tiny channels. Runes no knife could carve because they had been written with heat into bone. Threads of silver you didn't see until your eyes stopped focusing on the obvious. "What did you promise?" My voice sounded small under rock. "To keep the pack safe," he said. "To be the animal men are allowed to keep in their stories so they don't have to call themselves what they are when the night grows teeth." And how did that become a curse? When a promise is bigger than a person, it eats him and wears what's left. He touched the pillar gently, reverent as a blasphemer. "I killed. I was very good at it. I made small kingdoms sleep at night because their fear had a collar and answered to my whistle." The crown liked that. It began to keep score. Of bodies, of worship. He smiled without mirth. I did not notice who I had become until Varna asked me to kneel, and I could not remember how. Varna. The mirror's woman. My name's first self. "You loved her," I said. "I loved the world she believed was possible," he answered. "I loved that she could say no to me, and I wanted to hear what she'd say next. I loved the way she did not look away from the worst of what I was, and did not stop reaching for the rest." He looked past me to some careful distance, and I loved her enough to agree when she said I should be bound. "By her own hand," Vessa added, voice soft with an old respect. "She braided the root and the oath and the crown. She took the hurt you had earned and wrapped it until it could not cut anyone else. And then I freed you," I said. "And then you freed me," he agreed, and the admission did not wound him the way I'd expected. It was time. Or the world decided it was. Or you did. The reasons matter to poets. They matter less to wolves. I circled the pillar. The crown watched me the way stone watches. Not with eyes, but with weight. I felt something under my ribs tilt, as if the floor had shifted a degree and my balance would never be uncomplicated again. "What does it want?" I asked. "What you want," he said. I laughed once, short and unbeautiful. It wants to heal a village and cut its own throat for it? "It wants to be necessary," he said simply. "You call it mercy. The crown calls it feast." I looked at him then, fully, the way you do when you search a face for the map of a truth you've avoided reading. His scars weren't lines. They were languages, tiny pale threads along his forearms where chain had kissed. A darker seam low on his side, as if a blade had once argued with the idea of him, and lost the argument but made its point. Above his left collarbone, hardly visible except in that slow white torchlight, a thin crescent, a tooth, or a moon, or a bite he had chosen to keep. "What is that one?" I asked, nodding. The first time I let someone swear they would never leave. I wore proof until I learned that leaving is how love keeps from becoming a cage. "You speak like a man who has had time to think." "Centuries," Vessa said dryly. "Give a monster enough quiet and he'll start inventing philosophy to keep from devouring his own tail." "Will you always think of me as monster?" he asked her without heat. "Only on days you do," she said. The mountain hummed, a low, steady sound like a cat with the world's oldest throat. The mark at my neck answered it. A strange tenderness moved through me, toward the stone, toward the hall. toward the part of me that had always kept count of wounds so I'd know how many herbs to grind. I wanted to understand the crown the way a surgeon wants to understand a tumor, intimately enough to remove it without letting one cell escape. How do we end it? I asked. The crown's hold, the curse's appetite, the prayer people make when they want something to do their hurting for them. Kyle's mouth went still. There are 2 ways. Both will cost. Tell me anyway. The first is to break it, he said, gesturing to the pillar. The crown. That requires a night the old songs call the Nameless Moon, when the sky forgets itself, and nothing is quite what it believes it is. We are close. Days, perhaps. You would take the crown up in your hands and speak the word Varna taught the root to understand, and the crown would die. With it, the promise. With it. Some of the wolves who only live because it does. And the second? You wear it, Vessa said, not unkind. And you teach it a different hunger. I looked at the awful shape sleeping in stone. My palm burned where his blood had soaked. If I wear it, what becomes of him? Cale answered, as if he were measuring his own throat for a noose he intended to tie very carefully. The crown will recognize me and try to finish what it started. It may learn there is more of you to worship than of me to consume. A breath. Or it will eat us both. This is you asking, I said, because the woman in the mirror had told me what I could not forget. Do not forgive him unless he learns how to ask. Still here? I said, because it was all I trusted my voice to carry. He studied my face, and whatever he measured must have pleased the old thing in him, because a breath left his body like an apology he didn't want me to have to hear. Good, is it? I asked. It is. He pushed himself upright, wincing at aches that had nothing to do with wounds. The South has pulled back. Vessa drove off the worst of them before the right finished eating the room. The right ate? I glanced around, and in the chalk-gray light I saw it. The circle's metal line had partially sunk into the stone, fused there like fossilized lightning. My blood his. The old magic had taken its portion. It had been messy about it. What did they want? I asked. Truly, not the story they told themselves as they sharpened their knives. What they always want. He rose and offered a hand out of habit he would deny. When I didn't take it, he didn't insist. A world that never asks them to forgive what they fear. And what do you want? I asked, standing on my own. His answer was simple. To outlast the part of me that doesn't deserve to. Silence settled like fresh ash. I saw her, I said. In the mirror. In the right, the one who wore my face first. He didn't flinch. Kings don't. You saw Varna. My name in her mouth, I whispered, tasting it again. Lyra Varna. The syllables clicked against one another like joints sliding back into place. Was she my ancestor? She was your beginning, he said quietly, and you were her end. He crossed the dais with a soldier's economy, each step saying, I'm not tired even if I am. Come, you wanted truth. I will pay it in full. Truth, I said following, isn't a debt you can settle. Then we will overpay. He did not take me up, to the clean light and cold wind, but down, past the halls that smelled of steel and wolf, past the old throne that looked more honest empty than full, down through steps that had been carved with a patience no living mason would indulge. Torches here burned without flame, a white slow light that refused to flicker. The stone changed color as we descended, from black shot with silver to a deeper shade, the blue of bruises in winter. Vessa waited at the entrance to a door that wasn't a door, only a seam in the rock as fine as a scar you earned young and forgot about until a certain light found it. She had cleaned the blood from her coat. She had not cleaned the blood from her hands. It darkened the webs between her fingers like complicated ink. He brings her, she said, not to me. At last. She demanded it, he replied. Demanded. Vessa tasted the word with a private smile. Good. Her eyes slid to mine. You will want to breathe before you go through. People forget to inside. Why? I asked. Because the mountain remembers for you. I inhaled until the cold burned sweet. Cale placed his palm to the seam, and the seam widened like a mouth that had been waiting to speak a single name for a very long time. We entered a room shaped like a held breath. No angles, only curve. Walls that bent, ceiling domed low enough to feel intimate and high enough to make a cathedral jealous. In the center stood a pillar grown from the stone itself, not carved, not placed, risen. And inside that pillar, like a beetle encased in amber, lay a crown. It was not a circle. It was not pretty. Bone and obsidian and some metal, the color of a moonless river, had been braided together into a shape that looked like antlers taught how to think. It made my teeth ache to look at it. "The crown of shadows," I said, though I hadn't been told the name. The words knew themselves. "The first crown I ever wore," Kyle said. "The last crown I ever loved." "Loved," I repeated softly. "You loved a crown?" He did not take offense. I was young enough to mistake being necessary for being loved. "The crown encouraged the error. It speaks?" The hair along my arms lifted. "It listens," Vessa said, "and repeats the part you most want to hear." "Like a mirror," I said. "Like a debt," Kale corrected. "You asked what I am, what the curse is. It is this, a promise made to a throne. The Warden Queen bound me because I would not break the promise myself." I moved closer to the pillar. The mark at my throat warmed in warning or welcome. I couldn't tell. Close, the crown's details arranged themselves into something worse than ornament. Tiny channels. Runes no knife could carve because they had been written with heat into bone. Threads of silver you didn't see until your eyes stopped focusing on the obvious. "What did you promise?" My voice sounded small under rock. "To keep the pack safe," he said. "To be the animal men are allowed to keep in their stories, so they don't have to call themselves what they are when the night grows teeth." And how did that become a curse? When a promise is bigger than a person, it eats him and wears what's left. He touched the pillar gently, reverent as a blasphemer. "I killed. I was very good at it. I made small kingdoms sleep at night because their fear had a collar and answered to my whistle. The crown liked that. It began to keep score. Of bodies, of worship." He smiled without mirth. "I did not notice who I had become until Varna asked me to kneel, and I could not remember how. Varna, the mirror's woman. My name's first self. You loved her," I said. "I loved the world she believed was possible," he answered. "I loved that she could say no to me, and I wanted to hear what she'd say next. I loved the way she did not look away from the worst of what I was, and did not stop reaching for the rest." He looked past me to some careful distance, and I loved her enough to agree when she said I should be bound. "By her own hand," Vessa added, voice soft with an old respect. "She braided the root and the oath and the crown. She took the hurt you had earned and wrapped it until it could not cut anyone else. And then I freed you," I said. "And then you freed me," he agreed, and the admission did not wound him the way I'd expected. "It was time. Or the world decided it was. Or you did. The reasons matter to poets. They matter less to wolves." I circled the pillar. The crown watched me the way stone watches, not with eyes, but with weight. I felt something under my ribs tilt, as if the floor had shifted a degree, and my balance would never be uncomplicated again. "What does it want?" I asked. "What you want," he said. I laughed once, short and unbeautiful. "It wants to heal a village and cut its own throat for it. It wants to be necessary," he said simply. "You call it mercy. The crown calls it feast." I looked at him then, fully, the way you do when you search a face for the map of a truth you've avoided reading. His scars weren't lines. They were languages. Tiny pale threads along his forearms where chain had kissed. A darker seam low on his side, as if a blade had once argued with the idea of him and lost the argument but made its point. Above his left collarbone, hardly visible except in that slow white torchlight, a thin crescent. A tooth, or a moon, or a bite he had chosen to keep. "What is that one?" I asked, nodding. The first time I let someone swear they would never leave. I wore proof until I learned that leaving is how love keeps from becoming a cage. "You speak like a man who has had time to think." "Centuries," Vessa said dryly. "Give a monster enough quiet and he'll start inventing philosophy to keep from devouring his own tail." "Will you always think of me as monster?" he asked her without heat. "Only on days you do," she said. The mountain hummed, a low, steady sound like a cat with the world's oldest throat. The mark at my neck answered it. A strange tenderness moved through me. toward the stone, toward the hall, toward the part of me that had always kept count of wounds so I'd know how many herbs to grind. I wanted to understand the crown the way a surgeon wants to understand a tumor, intimately enough to remove it without letting one cell escape. How do we end it? I asked. The crown's hold, the curse's appetite, the prayer people make when they want something to do their hurting for them. Kyle's mouth went still. There are 2 ways. Both will cost. Tell me anyway. The first is to break it, he said, gesturing to the pillar, the crown. That requires a night the old songs call the Nameless Moon, when the sky forgets itself, and nothing is quite what it believes it is. We are close, days perhaps. You would take the crown up in your hands and speak the word Varna taught the root to understand, and the crown would die. With it, the promise. With it, some of the wolves who only live because it does. And the second? You wear it, Vessa said, not unkind. And you teach it a different hunger. I looked at the awful shape sleeping in stone. My palm burned where his blood had soaked. If I wear it, what becomes of him? Kale answered as if he were measuring his own throat for a noose he intended to tie very carefully. The crown will recognize me and try to finish what it started. It may learn there is more of you to worship than of me to consume. A breath. Or it will eat us both. This is you asking, I said, because the woman in the mirror had told me what I could not forget. Do not forgive him unless he learns how to ask. He nodded. Not a king's nod, an animal's, without pretense, with all the danger visible. Lyra, I am asking, not for myself, for what breathes out there and does not know how to call its fear by its name. And if I say no, the question tasted less like defiance and more like stewardship. Then I will find a way to make your no mean not yet, he said, and I will try not to make that a cruelty. Vessa snorted softly. We should be about the business of not dying until you decide your theology. Third way, I said, and both their heads tipped a fraction. You said 2. I know the sound of a withheld path. I hear it every time mothers ask for more willow bark than they need. Kale's gaze held mine. A long moment stretched thin. There is a third, but it requires a cost the old magic rarely yields back. What? You could trade me, he said simply. Bind me again as Varna did. New chains, new root, new seals. It would stop the blood from running in the streets for a while. It would stop me from failing the world the way I did before. He spread his hands. Empty. It would leave you free. It would leave me a story behind a door no one visits unless they are brave or foolish. Something inside me recoiled, not at the thought of chains, at the thought of his eyes without sky in them. Would you agree? Yes, he said, and the word had no ceremony in it. Only bone. I closed my eyes. The mark warmed against my palm when I touched it. I remembered the pendant's heat as it burned through my skin, how my breath had filled with his memories until I could not tell where my fear ended and his rage began. I remembered Reese's face upturned in the torchlight, the shock in it when he saw me standing on a wall beside the one he had sworn to hate. I remembered a village that smelled like rain and bread and was now a song written in ash. When I opened my eyes, the crown looked as patient as winter. Not today, I said. I will not trade you to buy myself the right to sleep. Kale's shoulders loosened in a way I felt under my own skin, and echoed release. Then we prepare for the Nameless Moon. And pray, Vessa added, if you know how. I forgot when I learned to heal, I said. But I can try. You will learn again, Kyle said. Not prayer, practice. They are almost the same when you do them long enough. He turned to leave, and I reached without permission, fingers closing around his wrist where a chain had once lived. His pulse leapt under my hand. We both pretended not to notice. Wait, I said. Reese, Vessa's mouth bent. Ah, the mortal. Where is he? I asked. He wouldn't leave. Not without knowing The word belonged to an earlier life. I didn't give it a chance to humiliate us. Kale's gaze went careful. In a room that does not lock, he said, guarded by doors that do. Take me. You should rest. Take me, I repeated, and something in my tone, the same thing that had set me walking into a cursed wood, put movement in his. We climbed. The castle's pulse quickened under our feet, sensing an argument it already knew the notes to. Hall turn, stare. I could have found the room without him. The door felt like a held breath. Rhys stood when we entered. The light compelled honesty. It showed the worst of him first. Bruises blackening along his jaw. A cut at his hairline that had stopped bleeding out of boredom rather than mercy. The look he gave Cale made kill sound like a prayer. The look he gave me made forgiveness seem disastrous and inevitable. Lyra, he said. Not a question. A benediction and a ruin. I'm alive, I offered, because the obvious is sometimes the only safe ground. So are you. For now, he said with a glance at the king. What did he make you do? My spine found a shape it liked. He didn't make me do anything. You wear his mark, Rhys said, agony sharpening the words. We all saw it. We smelled it. And you came anyway. I stepped closer, until I could see the green ring around his pupils that only showed when he was too tired to remember to hide it. Why? Because I always have, he said, and the sound of it hurt. Because when the world opened its mouth, I counted the people who fall out of it, and yours is the first face I see. Cale stood at the threshold like a loaded crossbow someone clever had leaned against a wall. Vessa had not followed us. Either she trusted me, or she had chosen a vantage point that would let her cut down whoever needed it most. You don't belong here, Rhys said, voice low. None of us do. This place, him, it will make a story out of you until you forget your own name. Come away while you still remember how. I wanted to tell him that my name had more syllables than it used to, and they tasted like oath metal and rain. I wanted to say that the story was the only way I had ever found to tell the truth without screaming. Instead I said, I can't. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Because of him. Because of what is tied to him, I said. Because of what happens if I leave and the crown wins. He stared, and then something in him, stubborn as a bruise, changed its color. Then let me help, he said. Let me stand where the door is thinnest and put my body in the way when it tries to close. Rhys, Cale said, and hearing his name in the king's mouth did something neither man liked. You will die. Then I will die knowing I didn't mistake my fear for my duty. They looked at each other, and some old logic of males considered blood, threat, the arrangement of teeth. I placed my hand between them, and that logic went quiet like a dog told to heel by the one person it would ever listen to. We do not have time to rehearse old wars, I said. We have days, maybe fewer. The Nameless Moon is coming. The crown will wake hungry. I turned to Rhys. If you stay under my word, not his. You answer to me. He looked at the line between my brows, and the mark at my throat, and the gods help us, fondness in the monster's eyes. And then he nodded once, a soldier's promise hammered flat. Under yours, he said. Cale's mouth twitched. I should be offended, he said as we stepped back into the corridor. You are, I said. You're just too tired to dress it up. He did not deny it. The castle changed mood when it learned the moon's calendar had teeth. Runners, wolves with letters in their mouths, men with scars mapped like rivers, poured in from the high pass, the dark heather, the wrecked south. Their news tasted of iron, packs splintering under old banners, wardens arguing in ruins. A rumor that something colder than winter had been seen drinking from a river that turned to glass in its mouth. We trained. Not at swords, at staying. Vessa drilled me until my breath sawed and my stubbornness had to choose between showing off and surviving. She taught me where to put my feet in a room that wants you to fall. She taught me how to speak to a mirror, without giving it everything. She taught me a word that isn't a word. A breath shaped into a sound that meant open when you meant it, and nothing when you didn't. Cale did not spar with me. He stood nearby and the air learned how to feel heavy. Now and then he corrected my elbow or the angle of my chin with ghost touch. And the mark at my throat answered his fingers like a yes-no oath. No one had sworn. At night, I dreamed in languages that had lived in the roots of trees. Varna came sometimes, not to scold, she had little use for that, but to show. Where the crown had first been grown, fed by bone and need, where she had buried the word that could unmake it, in a riddle so simple it had taken her whole life to find, where she had loved a man who terrified the part of her that knew love is not supposed to need so many knives to keep it from rotting. When I woke, the word was ash on my tongue. but the shape of it remained like a bruise touched through cloth. "Not yet," the dream said. "Not yet. Soon, on the third day, snow fell that did not melt when it touched skin. On the fourth, the wolves circled the mountain unbidden, placing their bodies where old songs said a line should be drawn. On the fifth, the moon rose with a pale ring around it like a throat marked by a hand. On the sixth day, the sky forgot its name. I felt it before I saw it. The mark at my throat turned cold. The torches guttered and burned back to life the color of breath in winter. The castle's hum shifted to a lower key, a sound that made my bones ache with recognition and warning. Vessa found us in the hall outside the room of the crown. She had braided her hair close, no perches for fingers. She wore a coat the color of midnight and carried a knife too honest to be ceremonial. Her keys lay quiet around her wrist. "It's time," she said. Rhys fell in beside me. He had shaved, a soldier's courtesy to his own death. He touched my shoulder once, a friend's blessing. Kale walked before us, a shadow with a spine. We entered the room of held breath. The pillar glowed faintly now, as if the stone around the crown were becoming skin warmed by fever. The crown itself had opened a fraction, antlers loosening, metal threads flexing like a hand before a grip. The air smelled like old rain on old blood. "The word," Kale said, voice steady. "Do you have it?" "I have its shape," I said. "I will know its name when it hears mine." "That is what names are," Vessa murmured. Kale moved to one side of the pillar. Rhys took the other, because he was the kind of man who stands where a door will hurt most when it swings. I stood before the crown and placed my palms to the stone. It thrummed under my hands, curious and hungry. "Lyra," Kale said. I turned. He wasn't looking at the crown anymore. He was looking at me like a starving thing trying to remember manners at a table. "If this goes wrong, it will," I said. "Everything does. That's how we know it's ours." "Then when it goes wrong," he said, mouth twisting with unwilling admiration, "remember the first thing you knew about me." "That you are not human," I said. "That I try anyway," he corrected. The pillar softened where my hands pressed. Not melted, not crumbled, relented. Stone became something like flesh, then something like water, then something like breath. The surface gave, and my hands went through, and the crown's weight leapt into my bones. It was cold. It was so cold it burned past cold to something cleaner. The feeling you get when you put your hand into snow and remember you are alive because it hurts. It had no pulse of its own. It wanted mine. "Hello," I said, because I was afraid and had decided not to lie to anything that could turn me into a definition. "I know what you are." It showed me what it wanted me to know that it was. 1,000 kneeling wolves. 10,000 torches choosing one shadow among many because it was the tallest and therefore the safest to hide behind. Mothers who slept, children who ate, men who loved their own hands because those hands held a sword with a name. The crown painted itself with protection and called the color virtue. "You are necessary," I said, and it preened. "You are not sufficient," I said, and it bared what passed for teeth. Under my skin, Kale's breath changed. The mark at my throat flared cold, hot, hot cold. Rhys muttered a prayer he would deny later. Vessa shifted her weight like a blade thinking about it. "Listen," I said. "Varna taught you to obey one word. You obeyed for centuries. I will not give you the freedom you ask for, because the thing you call freedom is hunger with a crown." I leaned closer until my lips almost brushed bone. "I will not break you to set you loose. I will not wear you to make myself large. I will do the third thing." The crown stilled, a beast hearing a new kind of footstep outside its cave. "I will teach you to starve where you are wrong," I whispered, "and to feast where you are right. I will give you a name that is not king, not queen, not god, not monster. I will give you a name that can die and be born without making the world pay for it." Behind me, Kyle made a sound I had not heard in all our days together. It sounded like a prayer he had stolen from someone kind and kept in a pocket, until it wore a hole he could not mend. I breathed once, long enough to taste the room and the men and the woman who would kill me if I asked it of her. I breathed twice, remembering ash and bread, and my mother's hands that smelled of willow bark and river. I breathed a third time and the word found me. It wasn't big. The old magic doesn't hoard meaning in long syllables. It was a small word with the weight of a mountain behind it. I spoke it. The crown screamed without sound. The room shook. The pillar liquefied and hardened in the same breath. My palms burned. The mark at my throat seared. The torches went out and came back as if the world had blinked and been surprised to find itself still here. I did not fall. I would not give it that. When the sound ended, the crown lay in my hands. It had changed. The antlers had shortened, the blades blunted. The runes had not vanished. They had turned inward. A circlet remained where a hunger had sat. I turned. Cale stared as if he had never seen a person before. Rhys's mouth was open and would become a smile or a sob when he remembered how. Vess's eyes were wet. She would deny it in every language she knew. It listened, Cale said, hoarse. It chose, I corrected softly. Or I did. Or we both did. I don't know the shape of the choice. Only that it is smaller and kinder than it was yesterday. Smaller and kinder, Vessa repeated, as if tasting a rune no one had thought to carve. We might survive such a crown. I stepped forward. The circlet weighed less than its shadow. I raised it, slow, because ceremony is how we teach ourselves where not to rush, and set it not on Cale's brow, not on mine, but on the pillar where it had slept. Not yet, I said to it. Not until the moon remembers her name. Something moved at the edge of my sight. A figure where there should be none. A flicker where the mountain kept no candle. I turned. She stood in the doorway that was a seam, haloed by the wrong kind of light, the color of words you regret. Her hair was braided in the old pattern. Her eyes were mine. Her mouth was a wound the years had not closed. Varna, and not. She smiled, and it was knives all the way down. Little Echo, she said. You found the door I left and opened it with a word I did not teach you. Cale's breath left him like something stolen. Varna. Not quite, she said. What survives of her that refuses to forgive you. Vessa took a step forward. Only one. Rhys reached without thinking and found my forearm, fingers bruising because they needed to feel bone. You bound him, the woman said, and her voice made the torches lean away. You freed him. Now you think to teach the crown a smaller hunger. I will show you the cost you forgot to count. She lifted her hand. The world tilted. The mountain answered, not with a hum, not with a tremor, with a word of its own. No, the seam sealed. The torches blew sideways and back. The pillar shivered under my palm. When the air went still, the doorway was stone again, clean as a lie. What was that? Rhys asked. An old ghost, Vessa said. And a new trouble. Cale didn't look away from me. She will try again. I know, I said. And again. I know. He moved closer, until the part of me that kept count of breaths lost interest because there were other numbers to learn. Then we finish this before she remembers how to knock. Before the moon forgets her name, I said, and the mark pulsed in agreement. The castle, hearing the shape of the end in our voices, began to gather itself to meet it. And somewhere beyond stone and oath and the clean cold of decision, the thing that had called itself Varna smiled with my mouth and turned its face toward the sky, where the nameless moon hung like a question only wolves know the word for. The night of the nameless moon arrived without warning. The stars vanished first, one by one, as if swallowed by something too vast to name. Then the sky itself went dark, not black but colorless, an emptiness so complete that even sound seemed to hesitate before crossing it. The world held its breath, and beneath that silence, the mountain began to hum. I stood at the highest balcony of the citadel, wind clawing through my hair, the mark at my throat pulsing like a second heart. The air tasted of metal and rain. The crown, our remade crown, rested in my hands, trembling faintly, as though it too feared what the night demanded. Cale joined me. His armor was gone. He wore only the shadow-colored tunic of his old life, stitched with fading runes. He looked less like a king, and more like something the world had tried to forget and failed. Below, the wolves had gathered, thousands of them, their eyes gleaming like a field of stars. And in the valley beyond, the warden's army waited again. They had come, drawn by the scent of the moon's death, two sides of the same sin. Kale's voice was quiet, but it carried through the storm. The crown must choose tonight. So must we. I stared at the circlet, its runes faintly glowing from within. You said it would listen to me now. It will, he said, but not gently. He reached out and brushed his thumb over my jaw, his touch feather-light yet grounding. Lyra, whatever happens, remember that what you are is older than mercy and sharper than love. I met his gaze, the gold in his eyes catching what little light remained. And you? What are you, Kale? His smile was a scar turned into a confession. Yours, for as long as this night remembers me. When the first howl split the air, it wasn't from below, it came from the sky. The nameless moon had begun to descend. A vast, colorless sphere sank lower and lower until its edges scraped the peaks. Bleeding light that wasn't light at all, gray, liquid, alive. It poured over us, and suddenly every shadow on the mountain shifted. Every reflection in the obsidian walls moved on its own. The wolves below lifted their heads in unison, crying out to something neither divine nor mortal. The crown in my hands burned. It pulsed with the rhythm of every heartbeat in the valley, every creature born of the old blood. I could feel them all, pain, loyalty, hunger. The bond between Kyle and me stretched thin, a taut thread of power that hummed with danger. Then the voice came. Little one. It wasn't sound. It was sensation, like a thought spoken from beneath my ribs. You would teach me to starve. I steadied my breath. Yes. You would kill me to save what you love. I would unmake you to set them free. You think you are not me, it whispered. And the voice was both male and female, cruel and kind. But you were made from what I am.
The light of the moon darkened. The crown melted in my hands, liquid silver seeping through my fingers. Kale reached for me, but his image wavered like heat on glass. The world fractured. I stood in a forest I had never seen and always known. The trees were made of bone. The wind carried whispers of all the choices I hadn't made. And there, at the center of the clearing, stood Varna. Or what was left of her. She was both alive and not. Her eyes were stars trapped in frost. Her mouth curved in that same almost smile that had haunted my dreams. You've done what I couldn't, she said. You gave the crown a conscience. I looked down. The molten silver had hardened into a shape, half circlet, half brand. It pulsed with my heartbeat. Then why do I still feel like it's killing me? Because it is. Her voice softened, almost maternal. You remade the curse. It needs a vessel until the moon remembers her name. Until then, you are its spine. How long? As long as mercy costs something. A tear slid down my cheek, hot and metallic. He'll die if I keep it. Varna tilted her head. He will die if you don't. Her figure flickered, unraveling like smoke. Love and ruin share the same blood, Lyra. You will have to choose which name you give it. Then she was gone. I gasped awake back on the balcony. Kale knelt beside me, one hand on my shoulder, the other gripping the crown now reformed in my lap. His eyes widened as he saw the glowing sigil spreading across my collarbone, twisting into the shape of the crown itself. It claimed you, he said, his voice rough. The crown has never chosen a vessel willingly before. It didn't choose, I whispered. I did. Thunder split the sky. Below, the wolves began to bow, not to him, but to me. Their bodies sank, their heads low, their submission ancient and complete. Kale rose slowly, eyes never leaving mine. Then you are queen now. No, I said. Not queen. Balance. He took a step closer, cupping the back of my neck. You think the world will allow that? I don't care what it allows. His hand trembled slightly, though his face betrayed nothing. You're burning from the inside, Lyra. The magic is eating you alive. I smiled, faintly. Then I'll make it choke. The air crackled. The nameless moon trembled, its edges fracturing like shattered glass. Light poured through the cracks, pure, blinding, alive. Kale's eyes widened. You're breaking the veil. I reached for his hand. Help me. He hesitated only a moment before entwining his fingers with mine. The mark at our skin flared, the twin sigils fusing into one blinding pulse of gold and silver. Power roared through us, tearing the sky open. The moon screamed. Every wolf below howled in answer. Every shadow folded in on itself. The mountain convulsed as light erupted from its core, washing over the armies, over the ruins, over every living thing born of the old curse. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the sky was clear. The moon shone white again, soft and full, remembering her name at last. The crown lay shattered between us, its pieces dissolving into dust that glittered briefly before vanishing on the wind. Cale was on his knees, breathing hard, his face pale. Blood streaked his temple, but his eyes, those impossible gold eyes, were fixed on me. "It's over," I whispered. He shook his head faintly. "No. It's beginning." "What do you mean?" He rose slowly, the faintest smile curving his lips. "You didn't destroy the curse. You became the keeper of it." I frowned. "Then why do I feel free?" "Because you are what it always wanted to be," he said. "Choice." He stepped closer, brushed his thumb against the faint mark that still glowed under my skin. "The wolves will follow you now. The crown obeys your mercy, not my hunger. The old ways are dead, Lyra. You are the first of the new." I felt tears prick my eyes, though I didn't let them fall. "And you?" He smiled, a real one, fragile and human. "I'm still yours. If you'll have me without the throne." I reached up and touched the scar beneath his jaw, the one that looked like a crescent moon. "I never wanted the throne. Only the man it buried." For the first time since the night I freed him, he laughed. A quiet, disbelieving sound that melted something in me I hadn't realized was frozen. We stood there, beneath the sky reborn, the mountain breathing slow and even beneath our feet. The war was gone. The wolves dispersed into the mist, leaving only silence behind. The world exhaled. And somewhere deep within that silence, a single voice, mine, his, perhaps the crown's, whispered to the night, "Mercy is dangerous. But love is worse."